Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday, May 4th, 2023 edition of the KCP-Edge community. We're joined today by a number of new folks and some other folks from some open source projects. Thank you and welcome. We are going with, there's a link in the chat as to where you can follow along in the agenda and also the Google group that you need to join in order to use that agenda. So before we get started, I'm just going to read off a quick contributor code of conduct. As contributors and maintainers in the CNCF community and in the interest of fostering an open and welcoming community, we pledge to respect all people who contribute through reporting issues, posting feature requests, updating documentation, submitting pull requests or patches, and other activities. We're committed to making participation in the CNCF community a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of level of experience, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, personal appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, age, religion, or nationality. Basic gist of this is just, please, everybody, let's just be nice to each other. Okay. We have a packed agenda today. I see some new faces on the call. Would anybody like to take a moment to introduce themselves?
Okay, I can do that. Hi, my name is Christoph. I work for KubeStellar and I'm here with a couple of co-workers because we are interested in keeping KCP alive for our use case, and we wanted to coordinate with you folks and see what you guys need and where we can collaborate.
Hi, Christoph. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Next one, if anyone wants to.
Yeah,
I can go next. Hi, Sebastian, also from KubeStellar. Same reason as Christoph.
Hi, Sebastian. Welcome.
Hello. Sorry, this is Victor.
Okay,
I joined the IoT Edge group yesterday, just to join here and participate in the discussion here.
Victor, thanks and welcome.
Hey there, Patrick here, also from KubeStellar. Nice to meet you all.
Patrick, welcome. All right, anybody else would like to say hello?
Yeah, hi, this is Marvin, also from KubeStellar, so the fourth one now. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, Marvin, welcome. Okay, and anyone else? All right, great. Philip, I see you're on the call. Philip Griffiths has joined us from the openziti project. Philip, are you able to stay past the first half hour, or would you like to go within the first half hour?
I would prefer to go within the first half hour, please.
Very good, very good. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and share the agenda as it appears inside the community call. Philip Griffiths is a gentleman who was working on the openziti project. You'll learn a little bit more about what that is in just a few minutes. I asked him to attend here as another person, a fellow, as Victor Liu is, on the working group from IoT Edge. He has some interesting information to share with us about that project and how it works on the transport layer, potentially help us out with overcoming some of the hurdles that we have in working together with other mechanisms that work on either side of that transport mechanism. So without botching that up anymore, I'll let openziti introduction go first here as part of the agenda. Philip, would you queue up your information and we can have a look at what you've got?
Yeah, cool. And apologies, I'm on mobile, so I'm gonna talk, but I also threw something into the chat window, which in fact, if someone could just bring it up and put it on screen, that helps me to talk around. No problem. Awesome, yep. Thank you. So yes, we were in the Kubernetes at Edge work group yesterday. You were introducing this project, and then a conversation started around, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be able to control how traffic gets to the edges, to be able to push configuration changes. And then someone started saying, oh yeah, service meshes move in this direction. And as this conversation was taking place, I thought to myself, well, this sounds like a great conversation for the project I work on, which is openziti. So openziti was created in mind to make it really easy for developers to build high performant and private connectivity into their applications. At its core, Ziti is an overlay network which is built upon principles around zero trust networking and software defined networking. But fundamentally, to do that, we have a few key principles which are deny by default and authenticate and authorize before connectivity, so that if you want to be on the overlay, you have to have a strong identity, e.g. X509. And this allows us to apply zero trust principles, including outbound only connections at source and destination, mutual TLS, end-to-end encryption, least privilege, all these wonderful things. But at the same time as being really awesome from the perspective of security, as an overlay network, ZT also provides the overlay transport, and that is done as a smart routing mesh network. And that allows us effectively to tie together applications or endpoints that sit in two completely private networks, to have no inbound ports, to have no VPNs or public DNS, and to allow connectivity to take place between them, as is on the
Did we lose you, Philip?
own built-in CA, but you
Hey,
can
Philip, we
bring
just
other.
lost the last 30 seconds of what you were talking about.
Yeah, sorry, I went from Wi-Fi to my phone.
That's right.
So I was saying that the transport and how it takes place on ZT, we don't just use the identity system for the security and the encryption. We also use it for how we transfer packets. So ZT has its own built-in certificate authority, though you can bring other external things like Spiffy Spire or Athens or whatever. But essentially, when using ZT, you don't even need to understand IP addresses and DNS. In fact, particularly if you go application embedded, which you have the ability to do with SDKs, then you effectively get your own private DNS where you can say, send from cloud to edge, or send from Philip to Andy. And the packets will go on the overlay according to using that system of identity across all of the various hops which are available. The minimum configuration for the overlay is that you have a endpoint at source and destination. So in this example, something at the edge, something in the cloud, and they make outbound connections into the control plane, the data plane, which sit on the wider network. Majority of that tends to be public internet, but we also have use cases where we deploy into completely air-gapped environments. And as you add more components to the control plane and the data plane, you effectively build redundancy into them. So the ZT data plane acts as a smart routing mesh where it runs a Dijkstra's algorithm to figure out what is the lowest latency way to get from Philip to Andy, or whatever the things which we are looking to connect. And that allows you to build up policies as to how you want to route traffic in order to facilitate the communication between the source and the destination. I use these words source and destination very distinctly because there is no concept of client or server in ZT. Any endpoint can either host a service or it can bind to a service. So in fact, you could put a service at the edge and make it look to other components like it's communicating to a server. The way in which we embed our endpoints at the edge is either being done at a network level, where we're effectively deploying virtual appliances and saying, we don't trust the internet or the external network because we don't need the inbound ports, we don't need the public DNS, etc. We also have a whole suite of endpoints which deploy on all popular operating systems, whether it's Android, iOS, Linux, or Pod, Sidecar, Daemon-Set, etc. And then we also have our suite of software development kits, which allow us to embed directly into the application. So we've got Go, C, Java, Python, Node.js, etc., etc. But obviously, with context of this project, Go is the important one. Passing comment, ZT is all, in fact, the fabric is all built in Go itself, which we see as a really nice language for doing that. So yes, going back to the conversation we're having yesterday, when we started talking about how we can connect distributed systems and to do it in a way which is highly secure, but also allows us to have high control, even though we don't know what the underlay is at all. We're able to do that with ZT because we've built all of the smarts into it so that we can, as long as we control the overlay, as long as we have something at source and destination, we can make sure that we get between those two environments while being fully compliant to things like Purdue and other security operating procedures within OT environments, because it's all outbound, because it's all built on zero trust principles. And so therefore gives us a really high level of control and security by default. I will pause there because I've thrown out already a shed load of information. It'd be great to get any thoughts, questions, etc.
Yeah, folks. So we're going by raise your hands if you have questions. That's how we run these meetings. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand in WebEx. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so a comment and a question. This reminds me of the RFC that Constantine Adam was working on. I'm not sure where that's at, but you know, this makes sense to me as something in the networking world. Question for you guys. One of our ideas about the edge computing problem is that edge clusters don't always have good connectivity. Depending on the use case, you know, you may have situations where, for example, it's an on-off kind of thing. It may be off for a long time, or it may be a always poor connectivity, or maybe sometimes good and sometimes poor. So I wanted to ask about openziti. Is there any assumption here about that issue?
It's a good question, and it depends upon how you're deploying. So we have customers who, in fact, I was having a conversation yesterday with a company that works on grids, and their default position is a system needs to be disconnected or have the ability to be fully disconnected and be with its own plane of control, because a tornado can go through and it can rip down the power lines, and those power lines could have the network, and therefore you have to rebuild it from hardware without any external dependency. That's absolutely no problem with ZT, because you can effectively have that control plane in that local domain of sovereignty. At the same time, there is a bunch of stuff which is built into ZT in order to resolve the problem of, well, if you want to work with external connectivity, how do you make the data plane as consistent and reliable as possible? So in fact, another person yesterday was asking me the question, well, what if my WAN links have intermittent connectivity? Does it disconnect the application? And the answer is no, because we can effectively have a socket from the application to one of our edge routers within that private network environment. And then the next connections northbound of that to the internet can be, have different sockets to different WAN providers, so that if a WAN goes down, then it can flip over to another one which is available, but fundamentally to the application, its socket is still maintained. So the application has no idea there is a disconnect within the network. So ultimately, I think the high level answer is the response depends upon the type of deployment architecture that's being done, but there's a lot of stuff that we've built in to make it possible / better.
Thank you. And I guess the one other follow-up comment. Our current no, I'll just stop here. I'll say, yeah, this is one of the kind of things we want to encompass in the future.
Yeah. So I was going to make mention, as Philip has been talking, and Mike, yes, Mike, yeah, this is exactly where we were going with it, is Constantine's RFC that he had started and was not able to finish. So in the area of ZDP, this is an interesting possibility for an experiment here, where we could combine the power of KCP-Edge and openziti to determine if this is something that people would like to have inside and control their edge locations, to have a transport layer that would be flexible enough to do the sorts of things that Philip has been talking about. Does anybody else have any other questions for Philip? Kevin.
Hi, Philip. I have many projects I'm working on at research, and one of them has to do with IBM Quantum. And I noticed that you've incorporated encryption into your tool. Are you planning to be nimble enough to be able to swap in quantum safe encryption techniques down the road?
Very good question. So, and I'm going to answer this in many ways. So, we do a lot of work with IBM already. One of the projects I have was with some of the HyperProtect team, where we've demonstrated the ZT control plane being deployed into confidential compute. We also do a bunch of work with the EdgeX Foundry team, and there's some work within the IBM IoT team around an edge retail stack that we've been doing. Ultimately, so ZT today has built into it, we're using mutual TLS between every single hop, and we do end-to-end encryption using Charter 20 Poly 1305. We've built it to be crypto agile. So the underlying components, we're using libsodium, which is a combination of libuv together with embed TLS from the ARM project. You can bring your own encryption, and we've built it to be extensible and orthogonal from that perspective, so that you can bring other stuff along. We do have some conversations with a couple of providers who are doing stuff within quantum cryptography, where we've basically said, hey, bring your own quantum to it. I know of one other organization that we're working with who is doing stuff within the DoD space, and they needed to be FIPS compliant, so they brought along Boring Ton from Google in order to do that FIPS compliant. I think FIPS on 20 encryption. So yes, we've not made it today to be quantum encryption, but there's no reason that you can't bring those things, because we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to chop and change it.
That makes me so happy to hear. That's the sort of news I like to hear from developers. Thank you.
Happy to please.
Thank you, Kevin. Mike?
Yeah, again, just to follow up on that and be clear, I think Kevin asked about quantum safe cryptography, and Philip answered about quantum cryptography. Those are both interesting, and they're both distinct from today's architecture, which relies on public key cryptography, which makes for a fairly simple architecture in that you don't need a central thing like a Kerberos ticket server. And these other architectures may need more, these other kinds of cryptography may need more complicated architectures with agreed upon servers and things like that. So my question to Philip is, do cryptography or, I guess encryption technologies, that require more stuff in the architecture, can they be used here?
Just trying to figure out how. So, could you rephrase the question?
Sure. So today, for example, with TLS, for a client, for a source to open a connection to a destination, does not require the participation of anything else. The source has a certificate, and both sides hold certificates. They do some stuff over a connection between them. End of story. In other technologies, it's a more complicated story. Like in the past, for example, there was a Kerberos, and a source would need to contact a Kerberos server. The destination needs to contact a Kerberos server. They need to do some setup beforehand. I suspect in the future there will also be these more complicated scenarios where there are more parties involved in making communication. So my question is, does openziti, work for security technologies that require more stuff to be involved, more parties to be involved in?
I see. I'm going to give a bit of a elusive answer because I'm not a developer, but I would say yes. Whether it's today or not. So basically, we're doing a lot of work on the control plane of ZT at the moment. And the code is almost there. It's kind of being tested in production at the moment for having HA within the control plane. So we're using Raft under the hood so that the controllers can all gossip to each other. So we've got resiliency within the control plane. As part of that, we've been doing a lot of work to refactor the authentication within the control plane. And the next thing that, quite literally the next thing we're working on, in fact, before who the developer on all the security stuff around ZT is already working on, is effectively having it so that you can bring any external authentication system to ZT. So anything that is SAML compliant or OICD compliant, you can bring it, you can present it to the ZT endpoint, and effectively ZT takes that, talks to the controller's talking to that external identity and goes, okay, cool, this is all authenticated. i.e., we're getting into a point where you can do both network level authentication, but also application authentication with delegation to the external identity provider or authentication authority. And therefore, if there is a more complicated environment that is using something like Kerberos or something else, I don't see any reason that it couldn't be part of that external system, which is in ZT, whether to say yay or nay to the connectivity.
All right, thank you. I could probably take the whole rest of this meeting with more questions, but I'm going to stop here.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so what I wanted to propose to the community here is that we undergo some initial discussions with Philip and the OpenZT project to determine how best KCP-Edge and OpenZT can bring together an experiment or a proof of concept that shows off the strengths of both projects and gives people an understanding of how they can use this to manage their control plane at large. Does anybody have any objection to moving in that direction? And if you may be asking who might be able to work on this, that's a good one too. I'll take that on proactively. I was thinking about enlisting some of the folks that had worked on the previous Zero Trust Principles document that we were talking about with Constantine, Ting, and Hamid. So I wanted to make sure that people knew that I wasn't trying to impose that on the community here. Does anybody have any objection to that? Okay. Philip, would you like to work together going forward to try and see if we can put together some kind of experiment between the two projects?
Yes, very much so. The if you wouldn't mind, someone mentioned an RF that was done in the past, which had allusions to this. If someone could shoot that into the chat channel or maybe shoot it on LinkedIn, Andy, that would be awesome. So I can have a look at that and share it with the team.
Yep. We'll dig it up. No problem whatsoever.
Sweet. Thank you.
All right, Philip, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, other than it was a pleasure to get to present and looking forward to building out the proof of concept.
Very cool. All right. Thanks for your time.
All right. I'll go on mute. Thanks, guys.
All right. Okay, folks, let me share back the agenda. We'll continue on. All right. Braulio, would you like to go first?
Sure. So yeah, just give a brief update. So we are working to develop the user kit and the develop kit environment so that users can experiment with can have instructions of how to deploy your environment and experiment with them. And also for the contributor environments where they have instructions on how to deploy and run our KCP-Edge infrastructure remotely. So we have API open for both environments. So yeah, when we are now revising the API and making improvements on them. And thanks yeah, a lot for the comments you have provided in the API so far.
Okay, yeah, so Braulio, thank you. So folks, just FYI, we've reached a pretty pivotal point in the project whereby we've got a release version 0.1.0. We've gone ahead and built that release. I'll go ahead and drop out there. Release is now available here and has the appropriate binaries tarred up We also have a container image that's located up in que.io that's also referenced by the documents that Braulio is putting together in this PR. If you'd like to be involved in any of this activity, I strongly suggest you reach out to Braulio and look at number 347, the pull request. You'll see there's a number of tools and artifacts that are being used to build the contributor development environment or experience and the user experience. When we believe the user experience will include is really the front door, the entry point for most people is our quick start. And that's how do you get started with KCP-Edge right away in a few steps. And then beyond that, if you're interested in doing any kind of contribution back to the code base, we also have a contributor development experience, which you can, which will also be included, which is also included in this PR. And so we hope to enable both our users, either casual or more would like to incorporate KCP-Edge as part of their project, much the same as we were talking with Philip just now and openziti. So this will be directly beneficial to the work that we do in those types of proof of concepts and experiments, as well as contributors that would like to contribute directly back to the code base. And that probably is speaking directly to folks that are on the phone from KubeMatic and from IBM and Red Hat. And so, yes, please get involved if you can. It would help us move that in the right direction. I think, Braulio, are we targeting the next community call as a possible entry place to announce the availability of both of these kits?
Yes.
These experiences? Okay.
Yes.
All right, great.
So just to spell
so-
it out, if someone goes and looks at our quick start today, it's not what we mean. It's very outdated. We're working on updating that.
Right. Good point, Mike. Thank you. All right. Anything else there, Braulio? Or does anybody have any questions for Braulio? Okay, great. Okay, next up, I built a tag in the project saying, is this still valid? So if you have this tag on your issue or on your PR, which there aren't many PRs at the moment, but on your issue, that means I'd like you to take a closer, or we'd like you to take a closer look at it, determine if it's still a valid or if it's been superseded or is no longer important to the project. It's just a few that are in there now, but if you have that tag on your issue, please take a closer look at it. I gave you an update on release version 0.10, so we're past that. We have a few, so if you've been out to our YouTube channel, you'll note that, first of all, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Second of all, in there, you'll see that we have what are called demo days. Demo days happen to be one of our highest or most viewed items in the list. And we've done a few so far. This one on particular on how to manipulate YAMLs or definitions of CRs using OpenAI GPT algorithm as not ChatGPT, but an OpenAI GPT algorithm, and ArgoCD experiments that we've worked on in the past and how we're bringing those forward. So this is some of our most viewed content. If you, we have just given an internal preview of our project to some folks here at IBM, but externally we plan on publishing some of that information. So we do have 3 such demo day experiences coming up. First is one on turbonomic, which is a tool that you can use to place workloads efficiently and in an optimized way. And they're leveraging and using KCP-Edge in their infrastructure via GitOps. So that's a pretty cool demo that's coming up. Second demo is with something called Maximal Visual Inspection, which is an AI and ML learning and inferencing tool. And it allows you to improve, amongst other things, quality of production lines and use it for determining anomalies in and detection using models that are built with AI tools. And so we have also used in that demonstration GitOps to show how KCP-Edge and MVI can be used together to both deliver the MVI Edge application as well as configure it post delivery and post deployment. So that's pretty cool. So look for that demo to come up. And then we also have another one from our counterparts over in Tokyo, some community members there, Yana and Yuji. They helped build the KCP-Edge syncer and then use that KCP-Edge syncer in a project they call compliance to policy, whereby they can adjust policy settings according to controls in NIST and other common policy frameworks to deploy those policies and configurations to tools such as Kyverno and others that are good for policy audit and enforcement. And we show off how we use KCP-Edge with compliance to policy in that demo day. And those 3 will be released in conjunction and in parallel with blog entries on our Medium blog post site. So if you want to have a closer look at that in the next 6 weeks, we should have 3 of those demo days posted. And so keep your eyes peeled for that sort of activity. And also along those lines, we have a new blog post that's just been put into the open source, the public domain, and that is about syncing objects. This is the KCP-Edge syncer that I alluded to, that is part of one of the demonstration days. The KCP-Edge syncer is a little bit different than the KCP TMC syncer in that we can synchronize not only namespaced objects, but also non-namespaced object or cluster scoped objects. And so that's important because many of the projects that we interact with, and just one example is Kyverno, does install upon its application or needs to install cluster scoped objects. And so therefore the KCP-Edge syncer was born. Does a few other things that are pretty interesting. One in particular is it upsyncs information as well as downsync. Why that's really important because now something like Kyverno can generate its own custom resources and then have that information upsync to its hub counterpart. This is really powerful stuff because for the first time it makes Kubernetes a bidirectional a tool in terms of delivering workload, delivering configuration, and then upsyncing reports from individual or an unknown at the moment of delivery necessarily, but any kind of resource that gets created by a tool that sits at the edge can then be upsynced to the hub. It's not something that Kubernetes does outside of just packing that information inside of a status field inside of the workloads object. So we're pretty proud of this work, and we think we see a lot of potential for it with that project and others. Let's see. We've got another Medium blog that's under the knife at the moment, and it's how to recreate our ArgoCD scalability experiment. It's in draft form. We are reviewing it internally, and that should be available when I arrive in Vancouver on Monday. I will be giving a talk, I believe it's on Tuesday actually, but I will be in Vancouver on Monday for GitOpsCon. And if you would like to, if you're going to be in the Vancouver area that day, or you would like to join us online, please do so. And that concludes my update to the community today. Any questions for me? Okay, thank you. Mike, you're up next.
Okay, and I do want to talk, but there is something not on the written agenda that we heard from guests at the start of the meeting, which is talking about continuing work on KCP. And I really want to encourage everybody to stop using KCP as a monolith. The first thing we need to do is think clearly about the parts or aspects we mean to talk about.
Hey, Mike, please continue with your agenda items.
Okay, so I will try to go quickly because I think we could easily spend a whole hour on this last topic as well. So actually, let me just talk to it very briefly. It's more of a FYI. So for customization, we have had a proposed API merged in the repo for a few months now, and I've started to do something about implementation. I took the first step, which is to implement a CLI that just exercises the functionality. So I added a command that is given a file name holding YAML for an object to customize, and optionally another YAML for a location object, which holds the key value pairs used in the customization, and it just applies the semantics defined in our API. If you look in our API directory, you'll see a customization.go that describes the API. And a couple interesting things to point out. So I'll remind people what that API looks like and then point out an interesting fact about the implementation. So the API, yes, Andy, do please dig into it. And there you go. So if you look at that, you'll see that, in fact, we define two customization techniques here. The simplest one that kind of would meet everybody's first expectation and first thought is a template and variable definitions kind of approach. The bad news is that only works for substrings. So the idea is that in the center, in your workload management workspace, in any object that is to go to the edge, where there is a string that is, there's a field, an atomic field of type string, you can put in that substring some syntax, that looks like variable expansion from your favorite shell, saying, %paren variable name, and that's calling for substitution by the value of that variable. And then the values are found by looking in the labels and annotations of the location where it's going. So this is rule-based customization, which is one of the key things that I think is important for this form of multi-cluster. We want to get from center to a large number of edge or destination clusters, and we don't want to maintain a customization bespoke customization for each destination. We want one rule for all the destinations. So the idea is the location has the variable key value name bindings, and then the rule says where these things get injected. And that's the simple form of customization, and I call it parameter expansion by obvious analogy to what you're all familiar with in shells. But as I said, that only works for replacing substrings in strings, and only strings where the validation that's built into your object type, because we can build validation into object types, where the validation accepts that syntax that asks for expansion. So that's a very restricted set of use cases that this works for. The next thing I did, and this is again modeled on other related systems here, so it shouldn't be any surprise, is a replacement form of expressing the desired customization. So if you look here at replacements, right, you see that it is just a series of look there and replace it with this. So the look there is a path expressed in JSON path. So that says it points to part of the object being customized, and then the value holds the JSON expression of the value to put there. So this can make arbitrary structure changes, fairly arbitrary structure changes, particularly since in Kubernetes, we have this convention that empty map or empty slice is the same as absent. So this can make pretty arbitrary structure changes. So it's more powerful than substring replacement. So I worked an example for MVI. For those of you who saw the presentation last week about that went through the examples that Andy mentioned for demo days. One of them was with MVI, and in there, because we don't have customization implemented yet, but a workload does need to be customized, what Frank had to do was make two copies of the workload, two distinct workloads, one for each destination. And obviously we don't want to do that. So I worked his example, and I was able to do much of it with parameter expansion, but some of it was not substring replacement, and so I did it with the replacement syntax. Now, the comment about the implementation. I chose JSON path as a way of expressing where to make the replacement, because it's a simple, common, powerful, known kind of way of referring to places in JSON objects. Kubernetes API objects are, we understand them abstractly, whether it's expressed on the surface in YAML or JSON, it's, JSON semantics for the structure of the data. So JSON path works as a way of pointing into one of these things to an arbitrary place. I picked JSON path expecting that it's got common good support. You probably know that kubectl can, for example, use JSON path notation for picking out stuff to display. What I discovered when I went to actually do the implementation was I only found JSON path implementations that can extract information. I did not find a JSON path implementation that can update a data structure. So in general, so what I did was a preliminary step. I did a preliminary step that got me partway there, and we need more work. I may do it, or someone else may volunteer to do it. The preliminary step is, or sort of the initial implementation, is partial, and poor efficiency. I found someone did implement an update. It's not exactly JSON syntax. It's a simpler syntax. It's kind of close to a subset of JSON. So, and the bad news is it doesn't work on a data structure such as you get after deserializing in the Kubernetes melu. It works on actual JSON strings. So what the current implementation does is for the data structure you want to update, it serializes it back to JSON, uses this package that I imported to do the updates, and then deserializes it back to the data structure. So that works as long as, with those caveats. So there is some
Mike, you've got a comment in the chat for you.
Okay.
Also.
Hi, Stefan. Go on.
I just saw this in some other tool, not Cube, but a YAML-based API in the embedded JQ, which can also mutate. Just an idea.
Right. I deliberately chose not to go as far as JQ because JQ is the only implementation of that I know, and it's not usable from Go other than, invoking, shelling out. I didn't want to do something that expensive. I was hoping for something that could update a data structure in place. Anyway, I don't want to take up again a lot of time on this. We can follow up on that. That's where that's currently at. I think it's so the two issues are we do need a more complete and efficient implementation for the pointing at a place part of this, and as well and getting an update there. And then I need to plumb this into the placement translator so that it invokes the customization as needed, as directed by the edge placement objects, or well, as part of its work on edge placement. So that's the end of that update. Let me stop briefly. Any other questions or comments on that?
Mike, I think if I read correctly on the order of operations, the things that we're working on, there are more complex customizations coming in the future, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Right. Oh, and one final comment. Just on our general thoughts on customization. Even this point at a place and replace it is not the ultimate. If you want the ultimate, I think something more like a full templating language at the source, surface syntax level is even more powerful, or maybe more direct and easy to use. This set of look at that place and replace it can get tedious if you want to do a lot. So, for example, Helm charts, they include customization using Golang templates. So I think that would be my thought about for someone who wants to use that form of customization. We don't need or want to reinvent the wheel. The whole point of the way we've done things is this should play nicely out of the box with other things such as GitOps tools and Helm charts. So just go ahead and use Helm charts, and then you can use the customization that's in the Helm chart. The problem there is Helm doesn't have rule-based customization. But if you look in, and in fact, it doesn't even have a state-based API. Helm only has an imperative API. But if you look in FluxCD, they've defined a state-based interface to Helm charting. And their state-based objects can be customized using this technology that I talked about. For example, in particular, I think the parameter expansion could be applied to the state-based API in Flux CD to Helm, and so that two-step way can get you a rule-based customization through the power in Helm charts. All right, so I want to stop here and go on to denaturing. This has been an important part of our design from the beginning. Stefan helped us work out that thing. I was really satisfied with that idea and didn't bother to even think about it for months. But it has gotten to the point where we can't ignore it anymore. I don't know about can't, but I think it's part of the design. We do need to do it. So I worked last week with Andy Goldstein on getting to the point where I've built an initial denaturing view. It doesn't actually make any changes. My goal last week was just to learn enough from Andy to add a view. So I've done that. And the remaining work then is to introduce the changes that we want. But I think I know enough to do that myself or help anybody else do that. So I think we've gotten a good start on implementing the denaturing view. Any comments or questions on that?
Yeah, Mike, before anybody else attempts to ask it, can you give us a brief understanding of why denaturing is necessary?
Yes. The issue is that some types of objects affects the behavior of the API server where you store them. And because we're using API servers as our container for workload prescriptions, you don't generally want those effects. There's a couple exceptions, which is the objects that affect what other objects you could store. So in particular, that's namespaces and custom resource definitions. We need those to take their intended effects so that you can store objects in the prescribed namespaces, store objects of the described resources. But other objects, such as RBAC objects and service accounts, they add to what can be done, which in general is not exactly harmful. It's not strictly harmful in a functional sense, but in a what's sometimes called non-functional sense. You don't want to have more things authorized than you really need. So we prefer to be able to denature these things. Another aspect of this, for example, is service accounts. For example, when you create a service account, as a response, the API server creates a secret to support that, or at least it has by default in earlier releases of Kubernetes. And that secret is not something that is really part of the workload description. It's not something to be transported to the edge. The edge is going to create their own local secrets. So it adds junk and confusion, and in particular causes some difficulty in that currently the edge placement object, if you look at it, for namespace objects, the only selector is on the namespace. You can't point inside the namespace and say, take this subset of what's in the namespace. We currently have a way of dealing with that by calling out the concept I sometimes call system objects, which are things we know kind of a priori should be transported to the edge, and that kind of covers for it. But this is all getting complicated and messy. The story would be simpler and neater if we simply did not have these objects when they're just being stored, or inert is another word that's used rather than denatured. The point is we want to use, currently we're using these KCP workspaces just as containers for inert workload prescription objects. And so denaturing is really about taking the object that the workspace itself would give some interpretation to and making it not do that.
And denaturing allows us to work with other Kubernetes distributions other than KCP as well, right?
So currently, the concept of denaturing could be extended. Today, the design is to have a denaturing view that denatures things that KCP gives an interpretation to. We could, in the future, make a more extensive denaturing view that denatures things that another kind of server, a general Kube API server, might give interpretation to. But also remember, in regular Kubernetes, much of the interpretation does not come from the API server. It comes from controllers. That
right.
even in regular Kubernetes can be turned off or
Right.
not deployed at all. So, there's discussion to be had there. I want to end this, as soon as we can to get on the other part of the meeting. So any other questions or comments here?
All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay. So if you want to work on either the customization or the denaturing view, please contact Mike and get involved. Mike, do you have an issue number for either one of those, or do you have a PR started for any one of them? I know there's code right now, but
Well, as I said, it's all preliminary. And yeah, I don't have PRs. I don't remember whether there are issues. I should create issues if they're not
maybe we should create some. Okay. All right, so let's get on to the next step. So we've got some folks here that have joined us from ex-Red Hatters. I've been corrected, and some folks from Kubermatic. And so we'd like to talk, table up a little bit about how do we work on selected KCP componentry within the KCP-Edge project or outside of it. So I'd like to start off by opening the discussion. Is there anything particular that I believe we have Kubermatic on the line? So Kubermatic, Christoph and others, have you been, or do you have some dependencies on KCP that you would like to continue to work on, or what is the motivation? Where are you coming from?
We want to use KCP for the upcoming major version of our product to replace some stuff and to allow easier GitOps for our end users. So we want to give every user potentially many different workspaces where they can manage their resources. And KCP is simply the easiest and cheapest way to accomplish that without having to run tons of etcds all over the place. So far, we have used of KCP mostly the logical clusters, so the workspaces, and we have dabbled a bit with API export and API bindings. In the thought that we needed those to have virtual workspaces so that we can reconcile with the one controller across many workspaces. We recently, I think, realized that we do not need specially written or automatically generated virtual workspaces for API exports. We could just handcraft this in Go. And so at the moment, we only really need the logical clusters and workspaces for KCP. We have no dependency on the syncer part. We've written our own syncer for what we need. And so that's the scope that we would like to keep alive. Okay. And we would like to coordinate with you folks what you need, where KCP-Edge comes into play, and what we can do to keep this alive.
Great, we appreciate your interest here at the community. So I know that we have quite a few people on here that probably could answer some questions with regards to the strategy and going forward. So a call on just to call out Mike, Paolo, and Stefan, and whoever else would like to jump in on that conversation.
Yeah, let me start by outlining some of the thoughts we've had. So as I said earlier, I think we don't want to think of KCP as a monolith. We want to identify the concepts and parts. Certainly one of the big factorings, the first one, right, that the KCP project already started on is separating between TMC and the KCP core. Even more fundamentally, I think, as the previous speaker mentioned, one thing is this concept of a multiplicity of what is called logical clusters. I never liked that term because cluster leads you to think about worker nodes and all that good stuff. What it's really more like about the API service. When this was brought up with the API machinery SIG, they brought up the term super namespaces. It's really about being able to have these independent scopes to hold objects and the associated behavior that's just inherent with API objects. So that kind of thing is one of the concepts that I think a lot of people have some interest in. And I started a document compiling use cases for that kind of thing. I think we should try again to go upstream to the API machinery SIG. The KCP people already did try this once, and it was rejected. I think because it was sold as multi-tenancy, and we're not, and the objection was that the isolation is really, that's in KCP between these things is not strong enough to really qualify as multi-tenancy. And I can accept that. The word multi-tenancy tends to bring expectations of very strong isolation. And that's not implemented. It's not necessary. So what I'm trying to focus on is on use cases that need this higher level organization of names and objects, but does not need a strong multi-tenancy notion. Because I think that's what actually is here in KCP today and what could be brought forward. Is the actual general use case. So
Mike, we're running low on time. I wanted to get Steph in
okay,
here.
so let me just go briefly. So one of the things is a long-term, this is got to be it will be a long-term project if it happens at all, of upstreaming this concept of logical namespaces, or super namespaces, and logical clusters, whatever you want to call it. Another is that it is a much shorter term, is developing a client-side abstraction layer that supports multi-cluster aware clients without any changes in Kubernetes at all. It's purely client-side mechanism. And as some of you may recall, Vince Pregnano reported doing this a couple months ago in the KCP community call. The only downside really is he did it in the context of controller runtime. I think we need it to not be specific to controller runtime, but to be a general thing that is, as basic as possible and generic as possible. So, anything that's, a kube client could be made multi-cluster aware. And so I've suggested, let's see, is Ezra? No, he's not on the call right now, but I think, I've suggested that he take the lead on, taking the work that Vince did and looking at, redoing it in a way that is completely kube generic, not specific to controller runtime. And that's something that I think we could make quick progress on, and it should be, I think, doable. But again, I haven't done the work. We don't know the outcome, but that's one thing. Another thing that
Mike, can we get Stefan in here?
Okay, yeah, just two more comments. Controller runtime and 1.26 rebase. Andy Goldstein is almost done with the 1.26 rebase. I don't know about his availability to continue working on that. It's a pain point to stay on 1.24. And the controller runtime proposal, I discussed it with API Machinery SIG yesterday. You can find it in the notes, and that's something we can work on. I'll stop here.
Looking at the clock, it's pretty late. It looks like we need a longer meeting. Maybe we can revive the Tuesday time when there was the KCP community call for that.
Yeah, I won't be around to host it, but we can certainly we can propose to have another meeting next week. Would it be okay if we try to block out Thursday again?
That's also fine.
Stefan's proposal was to take Tuesday. If you can't lead it, Andy, I'll volunteer to lead it. But I think that would be a good time and place for this discussion.
Very good. All right, so let's. I'll drop something out there for KCP-Edge for Tuesday to discuss these KCP specific topics, and then Mike, you can share.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Sounds like I'm getting some head shakes, some thumbs up, so that sounds acceptable. All right, folks, thank you so much. Recording will be out on YouTube shortly. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.